Hello and welcome to a new episode of Tell Muses, a podcast by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers and anyone interested in stories. This is Despina Riou from Greece, and together with my friend and colleague Simona Stampazzi from Italy, we are delighted to have with us today, all the way from Lichfield, UK, the wonderful, the inimitable, the one I personally really enjoy listening to, María Credali. Yay!
Good morning. After an intro like that, no pressure then.
Yes, of course. So, would you mind telling us a bit about who María Credali is?
That's a big question. That's a
It is, isn't
huge
it?
question.
Yeah.
Because there are lots of different strands. So, gosh, it's probably easier to tell you what I do. And then from that, you'll work out who I am. So I've been telling stories for probably about 7 years or so. So really not that long. I still feel like a beginner. And I'm hoping I always will feel like a beginner, because that's the only way you're going to learn, isn't it? You know, I'm quite happy to continue learning. I'm an artist as well, so I work as a creative mentor. So I work with children who have slipped through the cracks. So children who are disaffected, or they're out of school, or they've been in care, things like that. I go and work as a creative mentor with them, and I'll use all the different strands of my creativity. So I'll paint, we'll tell stories, we'll do riddles, we'll do all sorts of things, baking, everything. We do anything, but the whole point is to kind of increase their communication and confidence. And this is quite a deep moment, because I've just realised this is what I do when I tell stories as well. The reason I tell stories, somebody asked me the other day, the reason I tell stories is to make people feel better. There you go. That's a very simplified version, isn't it? But I love the idea that I can make people feel a little bit better about who they are and where they are and what's going on in the world. And stories are magical things to do that with.
And I think that we storytellers also feel good telling stories. It's not just the audience, it's a vice versa exchange.
I love telling stories. It makes me feel so contented. I feel really happy. But afterwards, I feel really contented, like I've done my thing that I need to do for the day. Do you know what I mean? It's quite a tricky one to explain that. But no matter what other jobs I'm doing, if I tell stories to an audience, I come away and think, yeah, I've done that today. That's it. That was quite a waffly answer. You can have a waffly answer for your first one.
Yeah, it was a good answer.
But I also dance as well. So I taught belly dancing for 25 years, as in Arabic dance.
Ooh.
Dancing was a big part of my life for 25 years, and taught classes for 25 years and loved it, and taught teachers to teach other teachers and so on. So I've got dance grandbabies, which is lovely. And then my back, I have a horrible back. It's got all sorts of issues going on with it, so I can't dance anymore. So that's when I stopped dancing and realised that was going to come to an end. I was really lucky that I'd already found storytelling, and the storytelling grew through that, especially during lockdown, because during lockdown I was recovering. I couldn't actually walk for about 3 months during lockdown, but I could talk and I could write, and it was really therapeutic for me. And lockdown was the time when everybody found each other online, so it was wonderful.
We found you online.
None of this would be happening, would it? Apart from lockdown had some terrible things. COVID was awful, but the actual silver lining that came out of that was the fact that we could connect with each other in different countries and widen the circle of people that you knew. It was game changing, really.
Yeah. There are many different aspects of your creative personality, but since we're focusing on storytelling today, Simona's got a question for you.
Yes, I'll try and funnel.
So I always like to ask our guests, how did your passion for storytelling start? So, for example, were you always passionate about stories? How did you get into contact with oral storytelling? How did it all start for you?
So I didn't know storytelling existed until 8 years or so ago, and I happened across it by chance. There were Lichfield storytellers. I live in Lichfield, were putting on a Christmas storytelling session. And I just saw it and thought that looks interesting. Went along to it. I tell you what happened. I happened to bump into an old friend from dancing on the street that I'd not seen for about 5 years. We got chatting and I said, I've just seen this poster. And we went along together. And I just never experienced anything quite like it. And that was lovely. But that was just little short 10-minute tales. And then I went along to their first professional teller in January, and it was Tim Ralph's. And Tim Ralph's told a story about, I think it was called Can the Mountains Love the Sea? And it was all based around Odin and Loki and Freya, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So that night when I got home, I was still buzzing because I could see it. I couldn't get over the fact that when he was talking, I could see everything he spoke about, and that was something really new for me. And I remember waking up during the night lots of times and just being able to keep seeing these images of Odin's hall and things that he'd painted in the air with his words. And I just thought that was some kind of magic, really. And then I saw Moni and Iva from A Spell in Time, who do Bulgarian folk tales, and they are absolutely wonderful. Moni's done so much research on it and is so passionate about it. And they have, not only does she have the most beautiful words and the lovely way of telling, but she also has Iva, who accompanies her with music as well. And again, that felt like you were being taken away into this. You were spellbound with it, you know. And I just thought it was wonderful. So it grew from there, really.
Unfortunately, A Spell in Time, for anyone who would be interested in looking it up, is gone now because there has been an issue with somebody plagiarizing Moni's work, so it's out. But they can find Moni, of course.
Yeah, look up Moni. She is the expert on all these stories, and she is so generous and kind as well, which is possibly a downfall in cases like these. But yeah.
Maria, you were telling us about the first performance that you went to. You were talking about these images that they created in your mind's eye. I was thinking, you told us that you're an artist, you're a painter. How does it connect with storytelling? So, for example, when you paint something, I guess you must have an image in your mind of what you'd like to paint, as well with stories. Do you have pictures of stories in your mind?
I do. That's a really interesting question as well. So I did an exhibition, not last summer, the summer before, which was all about stories and artwork. And it was about how to bring together the two art forms. So I painted or collaged or drew the images that had been inspired by various people's stories. And then we had an exhibition with all the paintings and the collages and the pen and ink drawings. And then next to them, we had a little QR code and people could click on them and they could listen to the original storytellers' storytelling. And it was wonderful. Most of the art that I do is inspired by stories that I've heard. In particular, the animal parts of stories. I find that fascinating because I have a degree in zoology as well. Sorry, there are more threads coming in here as well. But when I'm creating stories and when I'm telling stories, I can see the whole thing in my head. It blew my mind, actually. Not long ago, there was a post on Facebook about people saying, oh, some people can see stories in their heads. And I was like, well, doesn't everybody see stories in? And they don't. That was a really interesting moment, but I do. As I write, I kind of create, I suppose it's almost like a film, a movie. And then when I'm telling the story, because I'm just talking about what I can see, it's fairly straightforward to tell the story. The problem is, if there are problems, is between writing a story, creating it, and remembering it the first few times you do it. But once it's in there, once you know it, it's great, it's wonderful. So when people say, how can you possibly remember the stories? I don't, because I just watch them and then tell them. That's the way I do it. I know people work in different ways, but to me, that's the easiest way. That's the natural way for me. I see the story and I tell them what I see. I'm in the story. So
there are so many people among us, so many tellers who actually do this, and I'm sure that it was as much a shock to us to find out that there are people who have this aphantasia, I think it's called. Their brain just works differently. As much it would be for them to realize that we can actually see the scene in front of our inner eye. People are kind of divided. There are two different brain functions. And, as you grow up in a family and you believe that all families are like yours, it's exactly the same with how our brain works. We think that this isn't the natural thing to do. Actually, to me, it is the most natural thing to do because as humans, we start off like that. I'm sure that before we have words to express ourselves, we must think in images or smells or whatever, sensory.
This is when it gets really interesting. So I was invited to work with children who are blind.
Oh.
This was local to me in Staffordshire, and there was the visually impaired department, and they asked if I would go and tell stories. And I thought, this is brilliant because I will use all those other senses and so on. And then it suddenly occurred to me, if I'm describing things that they've never actually seen, how does that work? That is so completely out of my field of reference. So I phoned up Giles Abbott, who's partially sighted. I think he's registered blind. And Giles Abbott was very kind and sat and chatted to me on the phone for about an hour. And we were talking about all the different strategies that you can use to make the story engaging for the children. And we were talking about describing things in terms of different senses. So describing colours in terms of how they would taste and things like that. It was a real stretch. It was wonderful, actually. It was a really good stretch. And then when I got there, so we had partially sighted children, we had children that were completely blind, we had children that had gone blind having been sighted, and we had children that had been blind from birth. But we also had deaf children there as well, which I didn't know until I got there. So we had a whole plethora of things, different things to consider as you're telling the story. And they all absolutely loved it. They all came over at the end and they were all chatting in various ways about the things that had happened in the story. And we did some artwork based on the story. It was a real stretch. I think that is the most taxing bit of storytelling I've ever done, but incredibly rewarding because these little children were coming up at the end and talking to me about what they'd seen, or what they'd heard in the story. That was fantastic.
Sounds a bit complicated because some of them had some sense of sight and then lost it, but others did not have it from the beginning. For us, me and Simona, we're educators. It sounds like a mixed ability class somehow.
It's massively mixed, and also different age ranges and also different degrees of mental ability as well. So we had children who really needed a lot of support, and then you had children who were above average in intelligence and who were really sort of getting all the different subtle nuances in things, and then they reflect them back to you at the end. It was wonderful. So I'm also a secondary school teacher as well. Well, I used to teach secondary school science. So from the educator's point of view, yes, I was looking at it thinking this is possibly the most amount of differentiation I've actually done in one class ever. And it was fascinating.
I'm always amazed how right-sided brain people can also be left-sided brain people at the same time. You must be a very balanced person, Maria.
It's interesting because I am very much a foot in science, and I used to work in a bank as well. So I've kind of got the whole kind of business, bank, science teacher, and then I've got the whole arty thing. So I have got a foot in each camp, really.
All these things you've learned from your experience with visually impaired or hearing impaired children, all the tricks you got from working with those kids, do you use them in your tellings in general?
Yeah, really. A lot of them. Yeah. It kind of, I think every time you learn something new, and it might be something really specific. So I might have learned something specifically to help support this child or that adult or this child that's been trauma informed. There's all these different things, and they all feed into the general storytelling. And you find that your storytelling improves more than just the storytelling, the connection with the audience, which I think for me is the key part of storytelling. You can be as wonderful as you like as a storyteller, but if you're not connecting with the audience, that's not really storytelling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like listening to your own voice. We know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter how wonderful you are as a storyteller. If you have not connected with somebody who's listening to you in the audience, and okay, people bring their own worries to things, but hopefully through your craft, you can get them to put aside all their other thoughts and their other worries, and you can draw them into your world for a little bit, and they are connected to you. And that, for me, is the point of it. If you're not doing that, then what you're doing is theatre or television or something else. It's not storytelling. So that, for me, is key to what storytelling is. Gosh, we're getting very deep, aren't we, on a Friday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning?
Well, I've seen some of your artwork online, and I've seen a bit of it live once we met at Much One Look,
Oh gosh, yeah, I
Festival
forgot about
for
that.
Spoken Word. Yeah. You were a resident artist there, weren't you?
Yeah, so I was there for a month. I went over 3 or 4 times a week, and I was doing a huge collage, the biggest collage I've ever done. And it was the Firebird, if I remember rightly. And the Firebird crept into my head when I was listening to Hugh Lupton telling stories at Stealing Thunder Festival. And he was talking about this Firebird that, as it escaped the chains, its confinement, all of the colours began to glow again, and this bird began to look like fire again. So I've tried to capture that in my collage. So yeah, I forgot completely about it.
I remember that. It was magnificent work. Well, I like all your art, really.
Thank
How
you.
can people find it if they're interested in looking into your art?
So I have my website is mariacredali.co.uk, and most of it is storytelling, and then there is a section about art as well. On the art section, if you click on that page, you'll see some images there, but I do need to get more of them on there. I haven't updated that for a while, but that's where you'll see images. And also I've got Maria Credali Artist on Facebook as well, and I share a lot of stuff on there, and I share it warts and all, so when it's gone horribly wrong, it still goes on there.
So you mentioned now the Firebird. You mentioned at the beginning that the first story or the first stories that you listened to were stories from the Nordic mythology. And I was wondering, what kind of stories do you like to tell? Myths, folk tales, stories that you create?
Well, I have 2 favourites really. I have ones that have nice twists that the audience don't expect, and I really enjoy telling those. I love that moment at the end, which hopefully you've got them to get there just before you tell them, so they feel really clever. And I really enjoy stories that make people feel better. Those are my favourite stories to tell. But my sets, my shows that I do, I've got a mixture of my own memories and writing. So I write a narrative frame, and then within that frame, I hang little individual folk tales from around the world. So they'll fit within a theme. I love doing that because I get to weave, like nobody else can tell that show. You know, they could wholeheartedly copy every word of it and tell it, and it still wouldn't be theirs, because those memories are my memories. So I have a set called A Day at the Seaside, which is based around a day out with my dad at Blackpool when I was a little girl. And it's a way, my dad died just before we went into lockdown, actually. For me, writing that and creating it and sharing it is a lovely way for me to celebrate all the happiest memories that I had with my dad when we were little. And I feel like it's honouring my father a little bit. And I have a photograph of me and him when I'm like 7 years old that I show everybody at the end. And that, the shows that I do are, nobody could do that. They couldn't do my show because it's so personal. And the tales that are hung within that frame are traditional tales from all over the place. So I'll take traditional tales from different countries, rework them, rewrite them, and then they will get hung within that frame. That's generally the way that I work. I have a couple of shows. I've got one called 7 Years a Wolf, which is an Arthurian tale. There's no personal things in that apart from my own. We all colour the stories with our own personality, don't we? But that's based on a French lay by Marie de France from the 14th century. And that is an hour and 15 minutes of just one story. And that is a different thing again. People are hooked into that for an hour and a quarter rather than a traditional tale narrative. You can come in and out of the spell a little bit with that, but the epic one is just, people are completely immersed for the full period that it's being told. And that again is an uplifting story. That's probably the best way to describe the best sort of stories I enjoy telling are uplifting stories. They help people to feel better. They're uplifting stories.
It's quite an achievement to be able to hold people's attention span for that long, really.
But it's such a cracking story, though, Despina. The story in itself, I mean, when you read the old accounts of it, it's quite dry, but the actual story, what happens in it, is so gripping and so personal. You can really identify with this knight who gets turned into a wolf and doesn't know what to do with himself, doesn't know how to be himself anymore, because his whole life was about serving people, about serving, looking after his people.
Yeah.
And he gets that taken away from him because he can't do it as a wolf. So he finds another way to do it. And it's such a cracking story.
I hope I will get the chance to come and listen to it at some point.
Yeah, I need to take it out again. I'm in Gloucester with it in February, and I'm telling it in Lichfield some point later in the year. But it's brilliant. It's a lovely story.
On that note, Maria, do you think you could now share one of your favorite stories with us? Would you like to?
I will. Now, I don't know how many stories you want, but I have a short one. Should I tell you a little short one first?
As you like, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to tell you the story that comes from a time before we could just turn a tap on to get the water out, before we could just go and have a shower, before we could just flush a loo even, a time when no water was on tap. And if you wanted water, you had to go and fetch it. And this story is about a man whose job it was to fetch the water. And he lived and worked in a house on the top of a hill in a very hot, dry country. And every day he would pick up 2 pots, some heavy clay pots, and he would balance them on a pole that went across his shoulders. And he would walk down the long, winding, dusty path to the river at the bottom of the valley. And there he would take the pole from off his shoulders. He would fill the pots up with water, and he would have a little rest. And he'd sit and he'd listen to the birds sing, and he'd listen to the frogs croak, and he'd watch the water go by. And then when he'd had a little rest, he'd put the pots of water back onto the pole, heave it up onto his shoulders because it would be very heavy now. And he would walk back up the long, winding, dusty path to the house at the top of the hill. And he did this job maybe 4 or 5 times a day. And he was very happy in his work. You would often hear him humming a little tune as he walked up and down this hill every day in the heat and the dry, dusty landscape. Anyway, one afternoon, and we don't really know how this happened, but one of those pots developed a crack. And what happens when your pot has got a crack in it? What happens to your water? Well, it's going to drip, drip, drip. So when he walked back up the hill, that cracked pot drip, drip, dripped all the way up the hill. By the time he got to the house at the top of the hill, there was only half a jar of water left. Didn't bother the man one bit. He just carried on. He had to make more trips every day now because he wasn't carrying as much water each time, but he carried on. You would still hear him humming a happy little tune, and he was fine. But you know who it did bother? Now, we all know a person like this. It bothered the perfect pot. The pot that had nothing wrong with it at all. The pot that was absolutely wonderful in every way. And the perfect pot began to mutter and whine into the man's ear. And it would say things like, "What are you doing with that pot? It's a load of rubbish. Why don't you throw it away? It's making your life really hard. It can't carry the water anymore. Why don't you get another perfect pot like me?" Oh. Well, the man said nothing. He didn't say very much in this story, to be honest. He just carried on. And every day, as they walked back up that hill, the pot would drip, drip, drip. Didn't bother him at all. But do you know who it did bother? The poor, cracked pot. He had to listen every day to someone perfect telling him how rubbish he was, how pathetic and useless he was. And he started to realise that maybe she was right. Maybe he wasn't any good at his job anymore. He certainly couldn't carry water as well as he used to be able to. And he thought he was possibly making this man's life more difficult. And he tried so hard, every day he would try to close that crack up on himself. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not pull himself back together. One afternoon when they were down by the river, the poor cracked pot had finally had enough. And it said to the man very quietly, "Listen, I know we've been together a long time now, but I'm making your life hard and I can't pull myself back together and I just keep letting you down. Every day I lose half the water as I walk back up the hill with you, and I think the time has come to let me go. I think it's for the best. Just get another pot, another perfect pot, and just don't worry about me." And the man said nothing again. He went to the river, he filled up both the pots with water, he put them on the pole, he hoisted the pole across his shoulders, and he began to walk up that long, winding, dusty path to the house on the top of the hill. And all the way as he walked, the poor cracked pot drip, drip, dripped, almost as if it was crying tears into the ground. And as they walked along, the man said to the perfect pot, "Look down and tell me what you see on your side of the path." And the perfect pot, "Why?" The man said, "Just look." And the perfect pot looked down and said, "Well, there's nothing, is there? It's too dry for anything to grow. It's just dust and sand and stones. Why do you ask?" And the man said very gently to the cracked pot, "Look down and tell me what you see on your side of the path." And the poor cracked pot looked down, and all the way along his side of the path, up that long, winding, dusty path, there grew wildflowers. Wildflowers that he'd watered every day with his drip, drip, drip. I love that story. I think that is a story that everybody takes what they need from, and it's lovely.
I've heard it many times, and I've also told it. You're telling us lovely, Maria. Good.
Thank you. It's just so lovely. I make grown men cry with that. The fella came up to me in Manchester. The first time I told it, actually, I'd gone to see Taffy Thomas telling in Manchester. It was when I just started to tell stories, and they invited me to tell the story, and I stood up and told that story. And then when I sat back down again, Taffy Thomas said I was going to tell that in the second half.
Oh no.
And everybody fell about laughing, and I felt about this bit. I mean, he wasn't mean about it. It was just, it was quite funny.
It's a lovely, lovely story. One of my favorites, actually. And Maria, this may be rather a personal question for me to ask you, because I'm a dancer as well. And I think that when I tell stories, the fact that I've danced for all my life, I think you can see from how I move that I know how to use my body and how to convey meaning with my body. And I notice now, well, this is audio only when it goes live with the audience, but I noticed how you used your hands and you moved from one side to the other. And I was thinking, how does your relationship with dancing, how does it affect how you tell stories? Have you ever thought about this?
I don't think about it, because I think once you start to think about it and plan how you move, it somehow becomes a little bit more wooden and a little bit less natural. And so I don't over rehearse my stories. I don't rehearse very much at all with my stories, because I want them to sound as if I'm just having a chat with the audience. And that seems to be a really sneaky way of pulling people into your world unsuspectingly. I'm very similar with movement. So I don't move an awful lot on stage. I sit quite often I will sit, but I do use my hands and I do use my body, but I don't plan it out. I like using my hands. I use my hands quite a lot. But when I first started really telling stories intensively, it was during lockdown. So all you saw was this bit anyway. So I did find that there was a bit of a struggle to get back to using, thinking, oh, actually, I could use my foot here. I can actually stand up and walk around. So if I'm telling in a theatre or something like that, part of the stage will be one part of the story, part of the stage will be the other part of the story. So I do move around more, but it's fascinating, isn't it? As a dancer, I know exactly what you mean. I can see other people and think, oh, you've done ballet when you were little, or you did da-da-da, and you can see it coming through. It's lovely. I think it adds an extra little bit of something, but it just that little bit what really makes a difference. Yeah.
Now that you mentioned that, girls, maybe it's not proper for a storyteller to plan things. As you said, Maria, it should be more of an improv, our line of work. But we can always combine arts. I know that Jason Bach has done a show with a ballet dancer, for example, and I'm planning to do one with different artists here. Some are singers, some are dancers.
Yeah.
The central idea is the stories I've picked over the years over domestic violence, for example, or, femicide, which is a huge thing in my country, unfortunately. We plan to use those stories in a combined effort, storytelling, songs, and dancing. So it will be simultaneous.
You'll have to plan then as soon as you start working with somebody else. This is the difference, isn't it? We're quite lucky in that if we're working solo, you don't have to do any planning. But as soon as you bring somebody else in, you do have to start.
Well, it will
planning.
be a kind of an exercise for them as well, because as I'm not an actor, I do not memorize, I do not read out of paper. So it's not going to be the same wording every time. That will be their challenge. They will know the story and they will know how they want to interpret it through their art.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm working this year with Dave Tong. I don't know if you've ever seen Dave tell stories. He's fantastic storyteller.
I met
He's one
him
of the
in the East Anglian Festival last year.
Yeah. He's been telling stories for like 25 years. He's very, very good at what he does. He's one of my favourite storytellers. And we're working together on a set, which is going to be so it's going to be a show with the two of us. So again, you can't just make it up as you go. Well, you can to a certain degree, but you have to plan a little bit more because you're working with somebody else. So that's going to be interesting. That's called The Battle of the Britches, and it's about men and women and the little dance of power that we have going on between men and women, and explored through stories and riddles and lots of banter and things. And that's going to be out later this year. So we've got our first bookings for that later this year. But that's the first time I've actually worked with another storyteller to create a show together rather than just taking turns. It's a different thing again.
You mean you're going to be telling at the same time, not one after the other, not in turns?
We are, well, part of it, and some of it we're going to tell together, but it's created together. So the show is going to be created together, which is different to doing turn and turnabout. It's a different thing. We're creating a whole thing together. Yeah, I was talking to somebody about that the other day. Oh, I've got a musician that I'm going to be working with in a theatre in midsummer sometime, June, July. And we were discussing exactly that because I've never worked with a musician before. And this guy is a guitarist. And we're putting together songs and stories of midsummer. And I was saying there's two different ways you can do it. You can either just do people take turns. I'll do this, you do that, I'll do this, or you can weave it together into a fully cohesive show. The likes of Daniel Morden's done that with The Devil's Violin, and it's a very different thing. But we haven't got the time to do the prep necessary to create a fully fledged, fully integrated show. So that's going to be more of taking turns and just weaving together links and things.
I hope I will be able to see that as well. I want to see all of your work, really, to be honest. Yeah, I'm very intrigued. I mean, I've heard you tell on several occasions, and I've always liked your stories, both online and in person. And I have also told some of those. If you remember, the first one I heard you tell, it was at the World Storytelling Cafe, and it was about that couple, Frank and Eileen, the fisherman.
Oh, yeah.
Pre-Halloween, I think. Something like
I think it probably was, yeah. I that's one of the sets, one of the stories from that. Ghost story and a love story, so it's the two together.
Yeah.
So quite often I'll say to an audience, do you want a ghost story or a love story? And they'll go, well, we want a ghost story. And half of them will go, we want a love story. And I'll go, well, do you know what? This is both.
There was this one friend in the audience who was also trying storytelling at the time, who heard me tell it, and she was in tears. And the next time I tried it as a rehearsal and she heard me tell it, she was in tears. So, it happened every time.
It's a good one. Nobody else really tells that one. So that's just me and you. It's a gorgeous trope, isn't it? That idea of lost love and being able to be reunited again is lovely. You'll find that in lots of stories.
It is, but to me it resonated because I live on an island and my father used to go fishing. So, it was very personal. The agony that the one who's waiting goes through until their beloved one comes back was real to me. I knew that feeling.
Yeah. And that's what's really interesting about storytelling, isn't it? You've taken that's the bit of the story that's really relevant to you. And that's why you're hooked into it. Yeah. And what's fascinating is people will hook into different parts of the story. So you would think everybody would be really affected by X in the story. And actually somebody else might be affected by Y in the story. We all take we put our own personalities in as listeners, I think, as well as tellers. I think the audience does half the work.
Yeah, of course. Before we did this lovely interview, I had asked, do you have any star-related stories in mind? Is there one that, is jumping to come out, maybe?
I do. I have a story which I've heard a couple of different versions of it, and there are lots of versions around about it on the internet, and I've switched it up to include a bit of science as well. Being a sciencey teacher, I have got a little bit of ecology in it as well. And it's the story of how the apple got its star. Do you want to hear it? It's gorgeous. Okay, but you need to remember that this story I would normally be telling to a family audience, and there'd be lots of joining in and lots of getting to do things with their hands and all sorts of things. So you're getting a pared down version. Did you see what I did there? Pared down apple. Oh, I'm on fire. Right, so I will tell you the story of the little apple tree. Just let me get my prop ready.
So for people who cannot see what Maria's prop is, it is an actual apple.
It's an apple. So I didn't know we were going to be audio only. So I got very excited about using a visual prop. So there you go. You'll have to use your imagination and you'll have to do this yourself after you've heard the story. Once upon a time, there was a little apple tree. It was a baby apple tree. It was only about 1 or 2 years old. And I don't know if you know this, but apple trees don't start to make apples until they're grown up. And this little baby apple tree, he lived in the forest. And he lived in the middle of an oak forest. All around him there grew these enormous, majestic, magnificent, marvellous oak trees. They were all huge. And he was very, very small. And he grew in a little clearing in the middle of this oak forest. Don't know how he got there. Maybe somebody dropped an apple core one day. Anyway, as this little apple tree was growing up, every day he would push his roots into the soil as far as he could, and he would stretch up his branches to the sky. So I get everybody to stretch their branches up. And he grew and he grew and he grew. And he tried so hard. And at the end of the first day, they remembered he'd grown that much. He'd grown such a tiny amount. But every day he kept trying to grow, to become as tall as the oak trees, because that was all he knew all around him. Summer turned to autumn, and all of the leaves turned from green to gold, and then they were gone. And for the first time that he could remember, that little apple tree could see the night sky. And it was the middle of winter, and all the leaves on the oak trees had disappeared, and the apple tree could properly look up at this black velvet sky. And scattered across this dark sky were what looked like diamonds, but they weren't diamonds, were they? We know what they were. They were stars. And he thought it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And being a very little apple tree and looking up through the oak trees' branches, it looked to him as though the oak trees grew stars upon their branches. And he thought, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grow so tall, I'm going to hold stars on my branches. I'm going to grow stars on my branches. And he got so excited, and he decided he would grow even harder next year. And he would grow and grow and grow. And he was really, really small. And everyone else was really, really big. And he wasn't growing very fast. And then he realised that he was really tiny and he was never going to get any bigger, and everything, he was just rubbish. And this little apple tree burst into tears, and he went, wah, wah, wah. Oh dear, this poor apple tree sobbed his heart out. Walking through the woods that night was Mother Nature. And she came over to the apple tree and she said, why are you crying? And he said, because I want to grow stars on my branches and I'm not tall enough to reach them, and I feel really stupid and I'm just rubbish. Oh dear. And she said, oh, that's so sad. Now listen, you do know you're an apple tree, don't you? He said, yeah. She said, well, do you know how special apple trees are? He said, no, I'm rubbish. She said, oh, now, no, you're not rubbish. Now, listen, why don't you just try and be the best apple tree you can be for the next year, and then we'll see. Because that's what mothers always say, isn't it? We'll see. And the apple tree said, I'll try my best. And she said, now, look, it's starting to snow. And you know what happens when it starts to snow and it turns into proper winter? And the apple tree looked up, and the first fat flakes of snow came spiraling down around him. And she said, night, night. And the apple tree and all the other trees in the forest fell fast asleep. And they snored all through the winter. Everywhere, all over the forest, you could hear the trees snoring. And they slept all the way through Christmas. And then the winter turned into springtime. And in springtime, the days got longer, the nights got shorter, and it got warmer. And the little apple tree woke up. He stretched out his little branches, and he thought, right, I'm going to grow. And he began to grow as much as he could. And every day he pushed his roots into the soil, and he stretched his hands up to the heavens and tried to grow taller and taller and taller. And at the end of the first week, he'd grown that much. He really wasn't growing very fast. But something really special happened. At the end of his branches, there opened the most beautiful white flowers. And they were gorgeous. He'd never had flowers before. He was so excited. And along to the flowers came the butterflies and the bees and all the other insects, and they all fed on the flowers. And because the insects came along came the birds. And two little birds made a nest in his branches. And they laid eggs, 1, 2, 3 eggs. And then 1, 2, 3 eggs cracked open, and out came 3 little birds. Oh, and the mother and the father bird taught their baby birds to fly in the apple tree's branches, and he was overjoyed. And then spring turned into summer. And in the summertime, all of the flowers fell off. They fell down like confetti around his roots. But instead, they grew at the end of his branches glossy green leaves, and they all opened up. And if you sit under a lovely tree in the summertime when it's hot, you get a lovely shady patch, don't you? So the families from the nearby village would come and sit underneath the shade of the little apple tree, and they would have picnics and parties. And he felt really pleased. And then summer turned into autumn, and the leaves turned from green to gold. Something very odd happened there, and it had never happened to him before, and he was a bit confused at first, but it didn't seem to hurt. At the end of his branches, where those beautiful white flowers had been, there grew apples. And every day the apples got bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you've ever seen an apple tree laden down with apples, you will know what happened to the branches. The branches begin to bend down. And the tree realised that not only was he not getting any taller, but he was actually getting shorter. Now, this was no good at all, because he was never going to reach the stars at this rate, was he? Oh, he got so angry, and then he got so sad, and he began to cry again. He sobbed his heart out. Walking through the woods came Mother Nature, and she came over and she put her hands on her hips, and she said what all of us mothers have said at one time or another. She said, are you still crying? And he said, yeah, because I still can't reach the stars, and I'm still rubbish. And, oh. And she passed him a hanky, and he blew his nose. And then she said, now look, tell me what you've been doing all year. And he did. he told her about what happened in spring, about the white flowers and the insects and the birds and the butterflies. He told her about making a house, a place for the birds to make their nests. And he told her about the baby birds learning to fly in his branches. She said, "That's fantastic. Well done." What happened next? He said, "Well, then all my flowers fell off. That was a bit strange. But I did get some lovely green leaves and I made some shade and everyone came and sat in the shade and people had picnics and that was great. I was providing a nice place for people to have fun." She said, "That's amazing. Well done, apple tree. What else happened? What happened in autumn?" He said, "Well, then that's where it all went wrong. I started to grow these things on the end of my branches." She said, "Do you mean apples?" He said, "Is that what they're called?" She said, "What happened to the apples? Because you've not got many left, have you?" He said, "Well, actually, people came and picked them and ate them and they were all really happy and they sang songs and they harvested all my apples and they made apple pies and they made cider and they came and had a, well, actually, it was rather wonderful now I come to think about it. I like apples." She said, "So you should, you're an apple tree." He said, "But I'm still not tall enough to reach the stars, am I?" "But it doesn't matter because I'm an apple tree. And apple trees are really special, aren't they?" She said, "They are. Finally," she said, "you've worked it out. You've realised just how special you are." She said, "Do you know what? You're so clever. I'm going to give you a special reward." Now, on the top of his tree, on the topmost branch, there was one apple that still hadn't come down because nobody could quite reach it. It was near the top. And Mother Nature just blew on it. And the apple got knocked off the tree and it fell down and it bumped all the way down through the different branches. And when it hit the floor, it broke in half and split open. And she said, "There you go, have a look at that." And the little apple tree bent down and looked inside his own apple. She said, "It's been there all along. It's just taken you a while to notice." And inside his apple was his very own his very own star. And from that day to this, every apple on every apple tree all across the world has a special star hidden in it by Mother Nature, just to remind you that you are perfect just as you are. Your face there, that was lovely. I was trying to find stories for, I can't remember what it was for now, when I was originally looking for apple tree stories. And I've seen that as the angels come and give the star. If you keep it Mother Nature, that kind of rules out all the different religions. And it's a really simple way of getting a lovely message across. Because I usually tell this when I'm out telling stories with families at heritage places and stuff. And I'll say, "Have you got an apple with you in your picnic?" And they'll go, "Yeah, we've got an apple, we've got an apple." And I'll go, "Right, okay." When you get it home, make sure you cut it across like that. Don't cut it down the way we normally cut it across the middle, and they all go away. And I've had people send me messages afterwards going, "We found the star, we found the star." It's such a lovely message.
And it's such a lovely piece of advice also for people who have mixed audiences of different cultural backgrounds. You don't exclude people. You don't address only Christians, for example, or whatever. I do the same. I often use Mother Nature. And instead of angels, for example, I might have good witches.
Yeah. It was Taffy Thomas who gave me that tip. And when I heard him tell us a different story, and he was saying, if you say Mother Nature, it seems to work across everything. And it, yeah, like you say, it's very inclusive, that one, isn't it? And I also, if I'm telling it to groups of people that have got lots of very harassed looking mums in the audience, I can say we can really ham up the, all mothers say this at some point. You gave them a hanky because all mothers carry hankies with us all the time. You know, there's lots of lovely things you can do with that, depending on who you've got listening. It's a cracking little story.
Yeah, it's a lovely story. And every year I tell stories at an event that's organized here where I live.
Yeah.
And it's an event for the environment with children. And I think I found the story for this year.
You'll find versions of it online, but they won't have things like the insects and the birds and stuff. And I thought you can weave all the ecology through it, and you can get the children who knows the seasons of the year, and they'll all get really excited, and they'll tell you the seasons as you're going along. So there's lots of joining in opportunities as well with that. It's a lovely little tale to share. I love that story. It's a very feel-good story at the end as well. It works with all ages as well, because it works with very little ones who'll kind of miss the main message, will kind of go over their heads, but they'll enjoy the repetition and stuff in it. But teenage girls, it's cracking, because they need someone to tell them that they're perfect just as they are. They're in the middle of a battle at the moment of dealing with everyone telling them that they're not perfect and they need to buy this, that and the other to be perfect. So that's my own little war against the pressure that young girls are under, and young lads as well now.
Well, you were saying at the beginning that you like telling stories, feel-good stories, and stories with a surprise at the end. And I think that this combines the two, because I was thinking, oh, there's something coming up with that apple. There must be a surprise at the end. And when you told us about the star, I thought, oh, I've never looked at an apple that way before.
You need to go and get an apple and cut it open, honestly. So the only thing I would say, if you're going to tell the story, is cut your apple before and wrap it in cling film so it doesn't go brown. Because sometimes you'll do it and there is a star there, but it's not as easy to see. So you might need to just check and make sure you cut it the right way. So don't cut it top to bottom, cut it across the middle.
Horizontally, not vertically, horizontally. Yeah, that's the thing.
Horizontally, that's the word, yeah. And then just have it there. I mean, I've had an apple that has lasted with me all day as well. So we keep looking at it. I work in it's like a heritage site that's a museum for trams, Crouch Tramway Village. And I'll be on a coach, a tram sometimes, and I can walk up and down and show everyone, and they can all have a really good look. And everyone's fascinated, grown-ups and children as well. Everybody's fascinated with it.
Yeah, I don't think many of us have actually cut an apple that way in the past, but we're sure going to try it.
I did a lot of printing things with my mum when I was little. So I was apple printing, then you've got a star in it.
And you have stories for every age, because I remember that other story you told and I really liked. And I haven't told that one to an audience, but I have told it to some storytelling friends here on the island. The one about the lone old wolf, the ex-leader of the pack. That's lovely as well.
The Wolf and the Gypsy. That's an old Russian gypsy tale. It's from a book, really, really old book of gypsy tales. That was gifted as a Christmas present one year. And that's a lovely story. Gypsy stories tend to be they're quite bloody, actually. There's a lot of revenge and legs being chopped off and things like that. And this was a particularly gentle story, and it's got aspects to it that can be quite fierce, but that's a lovely message again. Stories with messages. I think all the best stories have got messages.
I remember the one Daniel Morden used to say, the one with the violin and how the violin got created. That was really gory.
Yeah. Different cultures have got different ways of... And it also... You have to remember that the gypsies are not a homogenous culture either. There's so many different groups of gypsies as well.
Yeah, they're called travelers nowadays, because supposedly calling people gypsies is kind of a derogatory term nowadays.
It's really interesting that I've got a gypsy caravan. I have a bow top gypsy caravan, which I've renovated. And when I was renovating it, I was talking to lots of different people, different traveller sites and so on. Quite a few of them don't like being called travellers, because travellers, especially in England, implies that you're an Irish traveller, which is a very different group to the English gypsy group. So you're walking on eggshells. Whatever term you use, somebody, if they want to, they can find offence in it. But yeah, so this book is called Russian Gypsy Folk Tales. That's what the book's called.
We can always ask people how they like to be addressed.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. How do you want to be termed? That's the best thing to do. I'm trying to think of anything exciting that I've got coming up. So I've got the set coming up with Dave Tong. That's going to be really good. What else can I tell you about? I've got lots of performances going on, but most of them are local at the moment, I think.
Well, I think that now that we've mentioned your website, we don't know when exactly this episode is going to be uploaded, so people will be able to look into you through that.
I do have a newsletter, though. So if people want to know what's coming up, if you go to mariacredali.co.uk, there is a place where you can subscribe, and I send a newsletter out once a month, and that has whatever storytelling and whatever art workshops or exhibitions I've got coming up. So people can stay in touch that way. And also people write back to me and tell me the answers to the riddles that I set.
I'm going to subscribe because, maybe I have an opportunity at some point at one of my visits to England to come and listen to you somewhere.
I need to do some more online stuff actually, because I haven't done much online stuff recently, and I really enjoy telling online as well. It's just not come up really.
Oh, lovely, Maria. Thank you kindly for your time and your stories.
You're very welcome. That was a very
Thank
nice
you so
way
much.
to start the day. Thank you.
Excellent. You have an awesome day then.
You too.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Maria.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye, Simona. Bye, Despina.